So 22, section 57. So test 57 in section 3, number 22. I hope it's
322?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's a flaw question. All right. And do you remember which one the conclusion was here? Or you can try one more time.
This makes that the candidates will compromise. No. But since wealthy are dispersed, this belief is false.
Yes, I agree. So even though this makes plausible the belief that these candidates will compromise their views, apparently it's false according to this person. So why is it false?
Because the wealthy are dispersed among the various political parties in equal proportion to the population.
Okay, and is there any other reason?
Makes it plausible for belief. So like we're contradicting that.
So I wouldn't, no, that's not really a premise, right? Why is the belief false? Because it's plausible? No, right? That doesn't make sense. But why is the belief false? Because of this, the wealthy is dispersed, whatever. And I guess a little bit of this too. To win democratic elections that are not fully subsidized, non-wealthy candidates must be supported by wealthy patrons. But this is more background info. I wouldn't really consider this. This is not a reason for the conclusion. It's more just context. So I would say all of this up here is context. So maybe we can put it in blue. Now, what was that plausible belief? That these candidates will compromise their views. But apparently, because the wealthy are dispersed among the various political parties in roughly equal proportion to their percentage in the overall population, this belief is false. I'm not even sure what that means. Roughly equal proportion to their percentage in the overall population. I have no idea what they're talking about, actually. But maybe if we look at the choices, we can kind of guess. Because there's going to be times when that happens, right? Where you're not sure what they're talking about. And you still got to do the question. So let's see. So it says, vulnerable to criticism that it fails to consider that the primary function of political parties in democracies whose governments do not subsidize elections might not be to provide a means of negating the influence of wealth on elections.
Just get rid of that because it brings in wealth.
Do you think that has anything to do with compromising their views?
No.
Don't think so. Don't know about that. In democracies in which elections are not fully subsidized by the government, positions endorsed by political parties might be much less varied than the positions taken by candidates. Well, first of all, we have to weaken this argument. And we have to say that they do compromise their views, potentially. But I don't see that B is doing that.
No.
I don't really see how it could lead to them compromising their views. So I'm going to leave that one. In democracies, government-subsidized elections ensure that the views expressed by the people who run for office might not be overly influenced by the opinions of the wealthiest people in these countries. What do you think about that one? At least it's talking about views, which is really what the argument is about, right? That they will compromise their views. Or, well, the argument says that they will not compromise their views. So we have to show that they will compromise their views. I don't know if C does that, but at least it has views in there. So I'm going to just leave that. In democracies in which elections are not fully subsidized, it might be no easier for a wealthy person to win an election than it is for a non-wealthy person to win.
That says it's about views.
Yeah. Don't really see how it helps, right? Okay. Democracy in which candidates do not compromise their views in order to be elected in office might have other flaws. Does it matter, though, if they have other flaws?
No, that's not part of the argument.
No. Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of left with these two. I'm not really sure about this question, actually. Section 322. Yeah. I'm not sure about this one, but let's look at the final two answers that we have here. And if you just stick to that notion, okay, the argument says they will not compromise their views. We want to try to say that they will. So in democracies in which elections are not fully subsidized, positions endorsed by political parties might be much less varied than the positions taken by candidates. Does that mean that they will compromise their views to win that support?
This is my brain hurts. When elections are not fully subsidized by the government, positions endorsed by political parties might be much less varied than the positions taken by the candidates. So, like, I don't know, like C. I don't like C, but because if
you don't like C, you said?
No.
Yeah. What don't you like about it?
Because it says like might not be overly influenced by the opinions. So like, if we're saying that it will, I don't know. It's just something just doesn't seem right. We're saying that if they won't compromise, that's saying that kind of will. It could like might not be overly influenced. Like they won't be. It might not overly be.
But doesn't C kind of lead you to think that they won't compromise then? Isn't that what C is saying? That people who run for office might not be overly influenced by the wealthiest people. So then doesn't that mean that they won't be influenced?
That's
So they won't compromise, right?
right.
So if anything, then that gets rid of C. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that just leaves B. But could I really give you a really good explanation for B? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this question, honestly. It's a tough one. It's a weird one. But you can get it by process of elimination.
I'm trying to think. I wonder which one I had picked because I know I kept getting that wrong.
Because we can point out parts where the other ones are wrong. I think it's tough on this one to prove why B is right. But if you look at the primary function of political parties, whose governments do not subsidize, might not be to provide a means of negating the influence, right? It might not be to provide a means of negating the influence of wealth on elections. It just doesn't have anything to do with proportion to their percentage and wealthy and I don't know, influence of wealth on elections. It just doesn't have anything to do with the stuff that we were talking about or their positions. I think A might be the only other one that's, potentially, but the primary function of political parties might not be to provide a means of negating. Oh, if anything, then actually
Influence of wealth.
that's saying that at least this one is saying that they will potentially compromise. At least A is a little bit closer because it will say, it is kind of saying that they will compromise. But the other ones, I think C is saying that they won't compromise. D is saying that they won't compromise because it's saying wealthy and non-wealthy have an equal chance, right? And then E says a democracy in which candidates do not compromise might have other flaws. It just seems irrelevant because who do not compromise might have other flaws. That's not the point. The point is talking about will they compromise or not, right? So you can get rid of that one. So I think between A and B are probably the two that you would have to pick between. So you might have picked A. I'm not sure though. But A would be the only one that would lean towards them compromising, I feel like, right?
Yeah.
So that would be the only other one that I would consider. But yeah, this is a weird one. Could be either of those, honestly, but I think B, can't really find anything wrong with B, but I would like to break it down though and see what it actually is saying. So apparently, because the wealthy are dispersed among the various parties, so you have some non-wealthy candidates. Apparently, they can get influenced by wealthy patrons, which are, would you say, citizens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or let's say wealthy patrons. But since the wealthy are dispersed among the various political parties in roughly equal proportion, this belief is false. So the reason, okay, I see that. Okay. So now it's starting to talk about if you have the House of Commons, it's saying that the wealthy are kind of evenly dispersed. So there's a
equal chance of everything.
Hmm?
Like an equal chance. Like it's not like.
Yeah, they're evenly dispersed, the wealthy. But what does that have to do with wealthy patrons affecting non-wealthy candidates? The point is we're talking about the non-wealthy candidates, not the wealthy candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't see how positions endorsed by political parties might be much less varied than the positions taken by candidates. Yeah, I'm not sure. This one's a confusing one. Sometimes you run into a question where it doesn't check out. But yeah, it's a weird one. There's definitely, there'll be explanations for it somewhere. But that's how I'm understanding the stimulus, is that it just says, well, you have the NDP, you have the Liberals, you have the PC, and there's wealthy people in each of them. They're kind of dispersed evenly. But what does that have to do with being supported? Wealthy housing must be supported by wealthy patrons. I think you have to say that it's irrelevant because it's not talking anything about the equal proportion and dispersion or anything. So you could get rid of A for that. I'm not sure how are not fully subsidized. Positions diversified might be much less varied than the positions taken by candidates. So if you have the three parties in Canada, and then the individual members have very different opinions, but the parties themselves do have very similar opinions. So okay. So maybe some of the lower income, okay. So maybe it's like this. Maybe if you have the three parties, you have the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, and they're kind of similar on their policies, is what B is saying. So they're 60-40 in terms of liberal conservative, and this one is more like, let's say 55-45. Let's make it more even, so maybe this 56-44, and this one is 54-46. So the NDP is a little bit more liberal than the conservatives. I guess they should have been the other way around, but hold on. So the liberals are 56 in terms of liberalness, and these ones maybe are 55, and then the NDP is probably 57, right? Let's say. So this is 45 and 43. But what they're saying is within the parties themselves, if you have a wealthy person in the NDP, they might be on their liberal scale, they might be a 50, but a non-wealthy NDP might be a 40 or a 60, sorry, higher in their liberalness. And maybe in the conservatives, same thing, right? Wealthy would be 45 in terms of their liberalness, and then the non-wealthy might be 52. And then here you might have wealthy is, I don't know, 47, and then the non-wealthy is 51. So in terms of rating their liberalness, I'll just use one number. So the parties as a whole are very similar, 55, 56, 57. But there's bigger disparities within the parties. But if you change the numbers a bit, there could be a situation where, okay, the wealthy is 47 in the Liberal Party, and then the party as a whole in their liberalness, let's say they're at like a 48. And in the Conservatives, they're at a 46. And then in the NDP, they're at a 51. You see how they're much closer to the wealthy than the non-wealthy? So it might be because there's a big difference in terms of the non-wealthy people versus the wealthy people in the specific parties. But there ends up being a small difference in between the parties themselves because the wealthy are having some influence on the overall party. Because the non-wealthy people, according to the stimulus, the non-wealthy people rely on those wealthy people. So if I'm a non-wealthy NDP member and there's a really rich NDP member in my party, I might give in to some of their demands because I have to, because I don't have the money to run my own campaigns and stuff. So although the wealthy are dispersed among these parties, there's wealthy people in the NDP, there's wealthy people in the Liberals, or wealthy people in the Conservatives, they still influence the other members of the parties. Just because they're dispersed evenly doesn't really matter. They're still influencing people within the parties to go towards them, because me as a poor NDP person, I need that wealthy NDP member's support financially. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it's making sense. I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really, like, I don't know how you do this in a minute and a half and think about it that deeply within a minute and a half, but I think that's what it's getting at. That, that's what B is saying, that between the parties, there's not much variation, but within the parties, you might have a wealthy person that's a 45 in the liberal score, but a non-wealthy conservative might be a 52. But then they have to compromise down to like a 46 because the influence of the wealthy person is greater than the influence of the non-wealthy. So that's what they're getting at there. And that's kind of what we see in real life too, especially with the US parties, right? The Republicans and the Democrats. They're very similar. Even though in the Democrats, you have people like AOC or Bernie Sanders that are much more left than the really wealthy Democrats that are like Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or whatever. But those are the ones that have way more influence than the really left-wing ones that are not as wealthy. So you kind of actually see that in real life too. And of course, this is an American test, so they know about that. They're aware of that. So all these questions are written by American people for the most part.
Sucks.
But I mean, I guess the good thing is that we get tons of American media and news and everything, so we have the context for it for the most part, right? Living in Canada. But yeah, I think that's what they're getting at there, is that although the wealthy are evenly dispersed, that doesn't mean that they're not influencing people within their own parties. The wealthy in the NDP are not influencing necessarily the wealthy in the Conservatives as much. as they might be influencing their own party members. All right, cool. So that's that one. It's a little bit more complicated than the usual question. So really, you don't have to worry. Don't worry too much about this question.
Okay.
Honestly, worry about the first 20 questions because they're a little bit easier. And I want you to make sure that you get all those 20 correct.
Okay.
Or as close as possible. And then when you get to the really hard questions and really convoluted questions or difficult questions to understand, just it's okay if you don't get all of them right. You maybe just want to get like 1 or 2 out of 5, right? And even that's enough. If you get a 22 out of, you can do the score calculators, you look at 7 Sage. So let's say you get 22 on each section. It's 66, which is saying missed. So how many missed? That'll be 5 plus 3 plus 4, right? So it'd be 12 questions missed. So that's like a 167. So, that's assuming you get 22, let's say, in each section. Even if you get 20 in each section, that's 5 plus 6 plus 7 wrong, which is 18 wrong, which is still a 162, right? So even if you just get 20 in each section, you still get a 162. So that's always what I tell people to aim for first. It's a nice round number to aim for. And there's validity to it because those first 20 questions are easier than the last 5. They generally are, and the first 10 are usually easier than the second 10, right? It progressively gets harder. So I want you to be able to get maybe at least the first 20 correct. And then even if you guess for the last 5, right? Let's say you guess for the last 5, you get one of them right. It makes up for maybe you got one of them wrong in the first 20. So, let's say you get 19 out of 20 in the first 20 questions, and then you get maybe 1 out of 5 on the last 5, right? So that's still 20 out of 25, which is still going to get you into that 160 range if you do that in every section. So yeah, you don't have to worry about getting every single question right. It's more about making sure you don't get any of the easy ones wrong. You don't want to miss easy points, right? And the medium difficulty too. You need to get the medium ones too. But yeah, if you're ever curious, I think you said you have 7 Sage, right? You pay for 7 Sage? No? Do you pay for any of the... But you have Law Hub, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Law Hub tells you what difficulty the question is. I'm pretty sure they do.
It does.
Yeah. They used to not do that, but now they do. So you can also see there, if 22 is kind of like a hard question, then I don't have to worry about it as much as, if I got a level 2 question wrong, then, wait, I really should have gotten that one, right? Exactly. So that's more where you want to prioritize. But anyway, let's move on. We spent a lot of time on that question. Let's go. So far, we've done strengthening, weakening, flaw. We did NA and SA, right?
Necessary, sufficient?
Questions? No?
No, I don't think so.
So we should do that for sure. Let's do that. Okay. So necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption. You've heard of these things, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How would do you have a definition for a necessary assumption, what it is?
It's been a while. I don't have it. Wait, can you give me a form? Hold on.
Okay.
Necessary. Find a premise that has to be true.
Yes. So exactly. Something that must be true if okay. Difference between necessary assumption question and necessary assumption in general. So, sorry, I said assumption. I should have said condition. Necessary condition. So a necessary condition is something that must be true if the sufficient is true. And that's the conditional logic stuff, right? So A is the sufficient, right? And if A is true, then B, the necessary, also has to be true. That's from our conditional logic, right? So yes, a necessary assumption is similar to that. So it's saying, like you said, a premise that must be true if the argument is ever to be true. And I'll show you what that means. So for example, let's say I give you an example argument, or let's just think of a sample situation. So your friend says, hey, I'm having a party on Friday. Will you be there? And you simply respond, yes, I'll be there. There are a lot of assumptions that you're making when that conversation happens, right? So if you think about it, your friend, all they said was the party is on Friday and it's their party. They didn't tell you a bunch of stuff, right? They didn't tell you where it was. They didn't tell you when it was specifically. What if it's a daytime party? What if it's a nighttime party? We don't know. They didn't tell you. Well, I mean, those are the two main things that they didn't really tell you, right? So you're assuming, okay, where? Okay, I'm assuming it's at their house because it's always at their house. Okay, and when? Oh, I'm assuming it's around 6 o'clock because Friday people getting off work, so can't be earlier than 6 or 6:30 probably. So that's around what time I'll go. So we make these kinds of assumptions in regular life all the time, but on the LSAT you can't make those assumptions, and that's what unnecessary assumption is about all of those hidden assumptions that people make that we actually cannot make on the test, and they want you to point those out. All right, so that all good so far? Pretty straightforward.